We've been at the forefront of automotive engineering innovation from the beginning, from the Model T to the fully autonomous vehicles of today. With the next automotive revolution happening right before our eyes, SAE's quantifiable research and reliable technical documentation are more crucial than ever. Connected vehicles, electrified vehicle technology, and sustainable transportation are just a handful of the areas where SAE International supports those who shape the future for the mobility of tomorrow. With more than a century of experience, a powerful and growing cohort of shared knowledge, backed by a global community of more than 200,000 engineers, technical experts, and volunteers, SAE continues to curate the most reliable and comprehensive collection of engineering resources and consensus-based mobility standards on Earth. Movement defines life. SAE lives to define movement.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Tabitha Colter, Director of Operations at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, Pave, and moderator for today's event. Thank you for joining us today and to SAE Detroit section for hosting the event. Before we start, I want to address a couple housekeeping items. All participants are muted with camera off to keep the integrity of the meeting. Please do not unmute yourself or turn on your camera during this discussion out of courtesy to the speakers. We do encourage you to use the chat box function throughout the event to ask any questions you may have. If you must leave this meeting for any reason, it will be posted on SAE Detroit Section's YouTube channel at a later date. Today, members of our Pave team will be discussing ensuring safety and empowering stakeholders, why automated vehicle education matters. We're looking forward to your questions and input, so please do use that chat function at the bottom of the screen so we can address them. Talking with us today is Tara Andringa, Executive Director of Pave, and Ed Niedermeyer, Communications Director at Pave. Thanks for joining us, Tara and Ed. We're going to start with a short presentation by Tara. Tara, could you get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tabitha, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. As Tabitha said, we all work for Pave, which is Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. And so I'm just going to start off by giving a really brief overview of Pave and what we do. I will share my screen. There we go. First, I'll just start with our mission. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our aim is to talk to the public about automated vehicles. We run a public education campaign, and we both like to talk about the technology that powers automated vehicles, and also to talk about the future and the possibilities that AVs offer, including increased safety, mobility, efficiency, sustainability. And these are just some facts about our coalition. As I said, we are a nonprofit. We have a very diverse membership. We have a lot of people from corporate America, startups, consumer advocates, a lot of nonprofits and other stakeholders. We also have two advisory councils. One is an academic advisory council and one is a public sector advisory council. And those are all leaders who help to drive our messaging and plan our activities. This is a list, just shows all of our members. And part of what we'd like to do here is I think it kind of gives a glimpse of the diversity of our membership. We obviously have a lot of big companies that you've heard of, and then a lot of startups who are just getting going in this space. But what's, I think, a really key point of Pave is the broad array of stakeholders across the AV world that are members of our coalition. And similarly, this is a list of our board of directors, which again, kind of shows, everything from National Federation of the Blind to Audi and Cruise, really a broad array of stakeholders. In fact, our bylaws require us to be a mix of nonprofits and people from industry. Our chairperson always rotates between a nonprofit and a for-profit organization. So we really hope, we always say that a public education campaign needs to look like the public. So we have a really diverse representation of people kind of, leading our organization. So then the obvious next question is, you have this really diverse group. What do you all have in common? And we always talk about two key beliefs that all of our members share. One is that our members all believe that AVs have the potential to improve the safety, mobility, and sustainability of our transportation system, that that all of these things can be better in the future, if when we really have autonomous vehicles more available. And then belief number two is that the public needs to be on board, that we will never reach the potential that AVs offer if the public doesn't believe in them. And right now, what we've seen is the public opinion polls show that people are overall largely distrustful and skeptical and misinformed about AVs. And so we both believe that AVs can have a lot to offer, but we need to bring the public along. And that's sort of how Pave came into being. And so then the next obvious question is, where is the public now? Almost half of people said that they would never even try out the technology. So we have a lot of work to do. But on the positive side, the other thing our poll found is that knowledge and exposure can move attitudes. So basically, the more people knew about AVs, the more they likely they were to trust the technology. And also, if people had exposure to the technology, that also would tended to grow, trust. So that's exactly what we are trying to do. We're trying to educate people and give them exposure to the technology, and hoping, that we believe in the power of knowledge. That the more people know, that the more likely AVs are to reach their potential. So that's what we do. We have a conversation with the public, and we really like to think of it as a conversation. I think that's a key word, that people's concerns and questions are real, and no one has all of the answers. So we like to listen to people. We believe that every person is a stakeholder in transportation, and our current system doesn't work for everyone. So we have a good chance right now to really rethink transportation and make sure that the system that we're devising works better for every person. So we are trying to empower people with knowledge so that they can be a part of the conversation. We want to make sure that everyone has a say in our transportation future. We want to demystify the technology a little bit so that people have enough of an understanding how it works to trust it, and also to talk about use cases, how different ways that AVs, and this just some of the pictures, trucking and passenger vehicles and delivery vehicles, all the different things that AVs can look like, and how they could potentially make our transportation system work better for everyone. So, we are not the first time, obviously, that there's been an education effort to really change public attitudes. And obviously the Click It or Ticket campaign, which drove seatbelt usage, has a lot of differences from what we're trying to do. But it's another example of when industry worked with government to run a public education campaign about transportation that really made a difference. It drove seatbelt usage to 90%. And so it's something that we use as a model. Again, there are a lot of differences. But the more that people know, the more a difference in safety we can make. So and that's one of the examples that we look to. And this is how we do it. We have a really diverse campaign. We do a lot of media and messaging. We run events. Before COVID, we like to try to run demonstration events. And in fact, in the opening video montage, I saw some pictures of, we actually joined SAE for a couple of events, including one with SAE Detroit at Cobo Hall. I think it's no longer called Cobo Hall. I'm a native Detroiter, so I still think of it as Cobo. I can't recall the new name, but we joined SAE in a couple of their events to really give the public exposure to autonomous vehicles. And we also do public sector engagement. A key thing about Pave is we do not lobby. We are policy neutral, but we do believe that in order for public sector officials to make the best choices for their community, they need to have education, just like the rest of the public. They need to understand both more about how the vehicles operate and needs and things like infrastructure and law enforcement and first responders and how AVs would interact with all these things. We hear from a lot of public sector officials saying that they want more information to make the best choices for their communities. So we do public sector engagement and education, as well as, lot of social media and other activities, web-based activities. And we're hoping that now that the world is opening up more, that we'll be able to get back to doing in-person events. Really believe in, it's amazing to see people's reactions when they have a chance to see a self-driving car. And I think when they experience the technology firsthand, it really makes sense. So those are just an overview of our activities. And that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Ed Niedermeyer, our communications director, and then we will be happy to answer questions. I'm going to turn off my video and take it away, Ed.
Thanks, Tara. Appreciate it. Give me just a moment to share my screen here. All right. So to start where Tara had left off there. So obviously, Pave has this really important long-term mission around this technology and ensuring that we as a society really maximize the opportunities that this technology presents. And obviously, it's a huge challenge, as she was describing, and it's just really a big long-term effort. But the other piece of Pave's mission is much more short-term and much more tied to sort of real-world safety concerns that are out there, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. So first of all, it's really important to preface this by just explaining, and this is really obvious to some people and less obvious to others, but this is a technology, and by this I mean autonomous vehicles. It's a technology that requires public acceptance. And I'll be honest, I knew this for a long time. I've been, paying attention to AVs and talking to people in the space for a long time, or at least a few years, a long time by the standards of the space. But I didn't really fully appreciate, how central this question of public acceptance really is to the technology until the first time I had the chance to ride in a Waymo that was fully driverless on public roads. As you can see in this picture, I'd ridden in, 6 different AVs from different companies, I think at that point, something along those lines. So this was far from my first time in an AV, but it was the first time I'd been in a fully driverless one on public roads. And there's something psychological, there's an impact that I didn't expect when I first rode. And you instantly, like something deep in your lizard brain starts to say, wait a second, why are you trusting your life? There's no human there who wants to protect their life as well as yours and will take over if something goes wrong. You're purely trusting the technology. And when you've been in that position, you realize, okay, I really have to trust this company. And of course, when I did that, I started thinking about, everything I'd known about Waymo and sort of the fact that they really had made the priority of going slow, taking their time, being willing to endure criticism for being slower than many expected, in order to make sure that they got all the safety elements right in what they were doing. And I think that record is going to be more and more important as fully autonomous vehicles become more of a reality. And so this is a really important backdrop to sort of some of the more short-term issues. Referring to the poll that Tara had mentioned that Pave commissioned last year, one of the key questions was, is it possible for me to buy a completely driverless vehicle today? Now, encouragingly, 55% of respondents said no. And that's, a great start, right? It could be worse, certainly in comparison to some of the resistance to getting into a fully autonomous vehicle. But if you combine the people who said yes and the people who said maybe, you have almost the same number of people who think that it might be possible to buy a fully autonomous vehicle. And the reality is that you can't. There are no fully autonomous vehicles for sale to the general public today. This is really important because what is on sale to members of the general public today are, sort of level 2 systems, which are not fully autonomous. They require a human in the loop at all times. But the concern is that when people believe that a system is more autonomous than it is, that there gets to be a disconnect between the human part of the system's sort of calibration to the automation piece. And when trust is miscalibrated, then that's when bad things happen. And we'll get into more of sort of some of the nuts and bolts of how that works. But just another sort of illustration of this, AAA, said that did a survey in 2018 that showed that 40% of Americans believe that systems with names like autopilot, ProPilot, or Pilot Assist actually make their cars self-driving. They don't. Thankfully we have the SAE system, which does make, pretty clear distinctions between the various levels of automation. But unfortunately, it's been a challenge to, really cement those distinctions in the mind of the public, particularly because there is so much excitement around autonomous vehicles and so much confusion. Now, confusion is sort of the baseline, right? Like, anytime you have new technology, and especially a technology as complex as any kind of driving automation technology, we can't expect the general public to understand it. But it's really important to understand that a lot of the confusion about this is just understandably common things, and that includes just the sheer proliferation of different branded names for driver assistance systems. So, I mean, just with a single brand, and some of these examples are older, and I think there has been some progress on these fronts. But if you look at, if you buy certainly a premium luxury car, a lot of times the driver assistance systems alone will encompass, numerous different brands and sub-brands and terms, and it can be all really confusing, and some of that is just natural. And I think, in addition, if you take this a step further and look at the media coverage, it's also almost inevitable that there will be some mistakes in the media coverage. And I think it is important to emphasize here that, these innocent mistakes are they are what they are. They're innocent mistakes, right? But they still show the need for education, because even as innocent as they might be, they can still have a very real world safety impact. One of the people who really has helped sort of catalyze sort of the awareness around this issue is Liza Dixon, who's pictured here with the confused cat, sort of representing the confusion that we're really all up against here. And her paper coined the term autonowashing. Actually, she first coined the term on Twitter. Speaking of which, if you're interested in joining some of the public conversation around these issues, Twitter is a great place to do that. But Liza really was able to, by coining this term autonowashing, which is really just overstating the level of automation of a system, of a partially automated system. She was really able to illustrate why this is such a problem. And she did that with a chart that I think is really important. And here we have a chart showing trust on the one hand on the vertical axis, and automation capability on the horizontal axis. And what it's showing is that you need to have the human's trust has to be calibrated to the actual capabilities of the system. Really, one of the big misunderstandings here is that people think oftentimes that the level 2 system is self-driving, in part because as a human, the steering and the brakes and the acceleration are sort of the things we do most consciously. But there's a lot of pieces of what the SAE calls the dynamic driving task that we don't do consciously. And especially with some of those pieces, it's really important that we understand that when we're using a level 2 system, it's not a robot, it's a cyborg. A cyborg is a fusion of human and automation, and that's what we are. And because we're a part of that system, our expectations of what that system can and cannot do have to be calibrated to the reality of what that system can or cannot do. If you think that the system, if you don't trust the system, right? If you think it's less capable than it actually is, you get down to that lower quadrant and you just distrust it, and frankly, you probably just end up not using it. In which case you don't get the benefits that ADAS really can offer. But we're focused on the upper part of this chart, the overtrust and autonowashing. And that's when, through both innocent mistakes, in reporting, but also, more conscious efforts to sort of play up the automation factor and really play on people's hopes and expectations for autonomous vehicles, even though you're just selling a level 2 system that requires a human in the loop at all times, actively engaged in the driving task. that's where you start to get into these real world risks. And this is not just theoretical work, right? So we're starting to see, so just last year, we had one of the first really important studies by the AAA Foundation for Road Safety, and it took Cadillac Super Cruise, which is, well-known, popular level 2 system, and they provided it to 2 groups of people. And when they briefed each group about the system that they were going to use, they told one group, this is called AutonoDrive, and really played up the automation piece of it. And they told another group, this is drive assist, right? So really emphasizing that it's really just there to assist you as the human driver. And simply by presenting the exact same system used on the exact same roads in slightly different ways, this really important piece of research showed autono-washing has real world safety implications. And this is just one showing, this chart just shows sort of people's misperceptions of the capability levels of these systems. But there's a number of other data points in the study that show that people actually look away more, that they're less attentive, that they're not doing what they need to do as part of as the human half of this hybrid system, and that's really troubling. And autono-washing on its own isn't going to kill people, but we do know, unfortunately, already that it can be a really critical part of what's called sort of a multi-layer Swiss cheese problem. And I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience are familiar with the idea of a Swiss cheese problem, but it basically means that you have at different layers, a hole. And when those holes line up, that's when you get really catastrophic results. And the reality is that, we drive so many cars, so many miles every single day that the law of large numbers means that we see these holes. These holes line up often enough. And in this case, the NTSB has investigated a number of fatalities and crashes involving Tesla Autopilot. I'm not trying to pick on Tesla. It's just, this is, these investigations are where we have the data on this problem. And so there's a fundamental tendency towards inattention in level 2 systems. And we're starting to see more and more research on that. There's just a brand new report out from MIT showing more of that. And then, so autono-washing, and this is where the educational piece becomes so important, it exacerbates that tendency, right? It tells you, it says, even though you're already kind of inclined to sort of look away more, or maybe try and look at your phone or just be distracted, that believing that the system is more capable than it really is, really just encourages that. And then, of course, if you don't have sufficient driver monitoring and you don't have operational design domain limits, the system's more likely to see things that it can't really handle, and it doesn't have as good a way of keeping you, attentive and engaged as a driver. And so when you reach those edge cases, which do happen all the time, in fact, you result in deaths, and we've already seen this. And I think it's important to understand that not only do these deaths, challenge, it shows sort of why this is such a huge risk, and why we really should be taking, really serious steps to make sure that safety equipment isn't making people less safe. But on top of it, because of all the confusion about the line between a truly autonomous system and one that requires a human in the loop, oftentimes these crashes are actually reported as autonomous vehicle crashes. And this is the kind of thing that when people see these reports, they say they contribute to those numbers that Tara was showing earlier, where I don't feel comfortable getting into an autonomous vehicle because I've heard that an AV crashed, even though an AV didn't crash. It was a human. It was a level 2 system, with a human fundamentally responsible for the safety of that system, and oftentimes these educational factors like autono-washing in the mix. So the sort of overall problems that Pave is addressing, it's not necessarily super obvious, how we're going to, be able to completely solve this problem, but we are starting to make real progress. I said one of the first really important pieces of this is the clearing the confusion standard for ADAS nomenclature, which the SAE is really important part of. And we, really celebrate the work that was done there. And really what this does is it just standardizes the language around driver assistance. So you may have a million different brands, but each of those sort of brands and sub-brands translates into specific functions. And people may not understand brands, they understand functions. And so these functions are like adaptive cruise control and active lane keeping. things of that nature. And by using those sort of commonly agreed on terms, we can help sort of avoid some of this confusion, in particular, because if you're using sort of real terms for, ADAS functions, it's less likely that autonomous washing is going to take place, because people know, these are just assistive functions, and that it's not where people really get confused is when there's one sort of umbrella brand, right? That kind of rolls a bunch of features together, and then people mistake that for being more automated than it really is, or more autonomous. Obviously, the SAE levels, super important in clarifying ADAS versus autonomous, automated driving system, autonomous driving system. Really important piece of it. I, really celebrate the SAE's work to continue to refine J3016 in order to make it more obvious to the general public that there is a really meaningful distinction. You see the differences in colors, and there have been a number of tweaks lately to really emphasize this. Obviously, we at Pave have our work cut out for us, and we speak with media and stakeholders on a daily basis to help them navigate these challenges. And I think in particular, we can do a lot more with the media to make sure that their reporting is truly accurate, and we've seen progress there, and I think we can continue to make progress. And then finally, we need to get creative, and I've included Smudge the cat here because he's sort of this internet icon of confusion, and I think part of what we need to do is to really sort of figure out how to make these concepts sort of much more publicly understandable and kind of more viral, so that everyone can kind of share them. And I think you all, having attended this call, have already been sort of, given a firmer grounding in these issues that most people have. And so I really hope that you all, do sort of help us take this message out to the internet, find new ways of articulating it, of explaining it, of demystifying some of these distinctions. Because at the end of the day, safety is really at stake here. Lives are really at stake. And so we have the sources for all of the research that I mentioned in my discussion here. Happy to share those with you if you just reach out to us. And with that, I will say thank you and turn it back over to Tabitha.
Thanks, Ed. Now we're going to move on to some questions. We have a couple prepared, but we would still really love to address any questions you have. So if you want to put those in the chat box, we'll make sure that Tara and Ed get a chance to answer those. So starting us off, Tara, I was actually hoping to turn it over to you and ask you about what are some of the different audiences for AV education that Pave works with, and how do we target them and adapt messaging to those unique needs?
Great. Thank you, Tabitha. So kind of going back to what I mentioned in my remarks, we start with the concept that everyone is a transportation stakeholder, whether you're you drive vehicles, you're a passenger in a vehicle, you're a bike rider, you're a pedestrian, you use public transportation, everyone is a transportation stakeholder. And if we think about it as AVs have the potential to really change our transportation landscape, really we need everyone to trust the technology and understand the technology somewhat. So we know we have our work cut out for us. And so sometimes I think at Pave, we sort of feel like we're trying to boil the ocean. This is obviously a huge task. But so we really like to break it down into different groups. And so I kind of, in my mind, I think of it as different subsets. So we both have people with all different levels of knowledge. Some, like many of you, are already starting from a really pretty sophisticated place. You know a lot about AVs, you might work with them every day. And there are a lot of, just tech enthusiasts out there. And then there are people with really almost no knowledge about AVs. It's not infrequent when we're having conversations with people and literally they say, you mean like the Jetsons? People really just have no concept at all of what a self-driving car means. Or like Ed was saying in his remarks, it's very common that I mention what we do and people say, oh, you mean Tesla? So just people's concept of what a self-driving car is varies a lot. So we have to speak to people at all different, levels of knowledge. Then I see also differences in terms of age. I have two teenagers who their future with AVs is very different than my 80-year-old parents. And then also with those groups, where they get their information really differs. A lot of kids, social media and TikTok and all these, platforms are where they get their information. Whereas for people in different generations, sometimes it's the local news or radio, or so we really need to look at different mediums for communication. And then I think that, I mean, I could go on and I won't, but one other interesting, I think, division line is geography. That some people like in Northern California, seeing AVs is an everyday part of their life. They're very familiar with the technology. Even if they don't know a lot about how it works, it's not a foreign concept to them. Whereas people in other parts of the country never see them. It's just not something that they're exposed to. And then also, we also talked briefly about how AVs can look like so many different things, trucks and passenger vehicles and delivery vehicles. People living in urban environments might have very different uses for AVs than people in rural environments who are curious, how could this technology change my life? It's a long way of saying the education effort has to be really broad and diverse. We're talking to all different people in different areas and different ages and different levels of pre-existing knowledge. So we really try to break our education efforts down so that we're trying to talk to everyone in different ways, using different language and different mediums. So it's a lot, but it's, which is partly why we have a really diverse group of stakeholders to be part of that conversation.
Great.
If I could just add really quickly too, yeah. And one of the things, so right now you're looking at the three of us, we're 3/4 of Pave staff, and I'm really proud of how much we are able to do. But if it comes down to just the 4 of us, I mean, it's going to be a really long time before we solve this problem. And frankly, that's where I think folks like you, if you do have sort of a more better grounding in this technology, I think it's really important that we find ways to help support you in getting some of these messages out and helping you explain the people in your network, sort of separating the truth from the fiction on these issues. So if that's something that you're interested in sort of being a part of, we do have sort of some channels for supporting that. And so I would really say because lives are at stake, we would really love to have any help we can get with that. And ultimately, we know that people listen to their peers a lot more than so-called experts a lot of times. And so the more folks like you that we have out there, sort of helping spread the word, the better. So.
Actually, Ed, following up on that and part of your discussion, how much information do you think people actually need to know about, AV technology is incredibly complex. So what are the main points that you think you're trying to reach audiences with?
So yeah, it's a great question. It's actually a question that I really struggled with when I first came to Pave, because it's not obvious how much people need to know. Sort of as I peeled the sort of layers of the onion off that question, that kind of what I came down to is, I mean, certainly I think for the general public, we have to keep it as simple as possible. And I think just if we can help people understand that there's a difference between driver assistance and autonomous driving, because lives are at stake in that, I think that, and because it's a relatively simple concept in this very complex field, I think we need to focus on those simple and impactful messages, particularly when there's that real world life and death aspect to it. Sort of slightly beyond that, though, I think part of bringing people from diverse backgrounds into this conversation, and by diverse backgrounds I mean absolutely the traditional ethnic diversity and gender diversity and all of that, but also just diversity of background, right, in terms of and communities. And I think we've seen sort of what happens when only technical people are working on a project. Oftentimes they don't understand, they're not equipped to understand the social implications of it. And this technology is so profoundly transformative that we really want people from all kinds of backgrounds to be able to join this conversation. And in order to do that, we can't teach them chapter and verse, so they're at the level of a self-driving car engineer. So where I've kind of landed on this is that we want to help people develop a mental model for this technology that helps them, or that empowers them to sort of reason for themselves about it. I don't know that we've fully gotten that down to like a precise science yet, but we're certainly making progress. And I think that's really the goal, because what we want people to do is to not just listen and regurgitate, but really start thinking for themselves and deploying their unique experiences and insights and applying them so that they can help all the rest of us in this space see things that we may not be able to see because of our backgrounds. And so I think figuring out that mental model of how can we understand how this technology kind of works in a general way, what its limitations are, what its strengths are, where progress is being made. That's really what will help people, start to really engage in these conversations more.
I think that's right, Ed. And the one thing, and this isn't different than what you're saying, but just what I would add, Tabitha's question, how much do you need to know about AVs? And I would say you need to know enough to trust them. Like the average person, if you ask them, how does a carburetor work in a car? I think a lot of drivers couldn't even begin to answer that question. And yet you have enough experience with the car that you kind of know how the car is going to operate. And, similar like our phone in our pocket, most people couldn't take it apart and put it back together and understand, but you have enough experience. Your phone's not going to burst into flames in your pocket. Your phone's not going to suddenly delete all your contacts. You kind of have enough working knowledge to trust it. And I think in my mind, that's where we're trying to get with the public, is just enough working knowledge. And, we kind of at Pave talk about, we try to really simplify AVs and compare sensors to like human senses, like the eyes and the ears and the, kind of that a car has similarly is learning its environment from its sensors, and just trying to, again, simplify the technology enough that people start to build trust. I don't know, it's similar, but just kind of a slightly different take on the same idea.
Okay. We just received an audience question actually asking about Tesla's full self-driving beta. And mostly the question seems to be asking sort of what the clear distinction is between the SAE levels 2 and SAE level 3. The person was saying that they don't think there's usually a clear distinction between those for the public. Tara and Ed, could you guys explain where you see that distinction, or what you think that main messaging should be around the distinction between 2 and 3 with regards to the public?
Well, I'm going to give a really quick answer, and then Ed is much, 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 much more knowledgeable on the subject. So I'm going to then turn it over to him. I think in terms of our public education effort, I like to think about it as the human role. That I think SAE's levels are brilliant in terms of the industry and engineers and understanding a car's capabilities. But I don't think we're ever going to get to the point that just every person walking down the street is being able to look at a car and say, oh, that's a level 4 car. I think what's really important in terms of the public is people to understand that no matter what cool things the car can do and what capabilities it has, the human is in control until the very bright line when it's not. And no matter what awesome stuff your car is capable of doing in terms of automatic emergency braking and lane keeping assist and all those cool bells and whistles, it still requires a human in charge until we get to the point that it's truly a self-driving car, in which case the car is in control, but we're not there. Anyway, so we like to think about it or talk about it publicly in terms of the human role. But Ed, I will let you give the much more technical answer.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think that was a really good way of framing it, and I think you're absolutely right. So on a more sort of sophisticated level, the challenge here is that one of the great strengths of SAE's system is that it provides the manufacturer the flexibility to sort of decide, okay, what is our design intent with this system, and then do it themselves. There is no, I think one of the big misconceptions here is that there's some kind of test, right? And if you pass some test, then you graduate from being level 2 to level 3. And the reality is that's really not how it works. Unfortunately, I think what we are seeing is one of the sort of challenges that presents, which is that if an automaker decides that it's in their interest for whatever reason, and I don't want to make assumptions about it, but certainly I think one likelihood is for example, in the state of California, if you have a system that's level 3 or higher, you have to log every single mile with the DMV and log every single disengagement. And so I think calling something a level 2 system, regardless of what it is, might seem like a sort of way you could sort of get out of that that regulatory requirement, which by the way is much, much harder if you're talking about something that you're just putting into the hands of the general public versus a fleet that you're actually controlling of your employees. And so I think this is just one of many regulatory challenges. It really highlights the need for not just public education, but really educating public servants and policymakers so that they are able to understand some of these distinctions. Because I think for example, the California regulation that I mentioned, it was very clearly written by people who just assumed that autonomous vehicles would be operated as fleets, which to be fair, that's how it has all been done, right? All the actual autonomous vehicles that are on public roads are operated by company or developer owned fleets, but they didn't anticipate that a company might sort of try to push the level of automation in their systems while continuing to call it level 2 and putting it in the hands of the general public, which there's a lot of issues with. So the reality is that it's not for us to decide what level Tesla's or any other automaker system is. What we need to see is is basically, the whole industry agreeing that we're going to kind of play by the basic rules of the SAE system, because it provides order in a really, really complex topic. And I think, the reason we have this confusion is because, Tesla just has decided not to play by those rules and to try and find loopholes in them. How exactly, that should be resolved, it's really not in my place to say, but I think that it really does show the need for everyone to understand what these rules, what the levels of automation are, and what they're not, sort of at the high level, right? At the high level of this is something that companies self-apply based on design intent rather than some objective standard that you could, for example, test for.
Right. We just received another audience question that asks, how much education do people receive when they purchase a new vehicle with ADAS? Could car dealerships / salespeople be utilized more to provide standard education? Tara, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually something we talk about a lot, that I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. I've seen some polls, and I actually can't recall off the top of my head where, but I'd be happy to look it up. But that they've shown that when people purchase cars, most of the education goes to like the entertainment console. How do you pair your phone and instead of safety features? That's what people are curious about. But actually at Pave, not to be a full Pave advertisement, but we have been talking, one of our members is the National Association of Auto Dealers, and we have been talking about trying to put together packages that the dealerships could use to educate people when they purchase cars. And actually one of our Pave members has agreed to sort of be a beta, to be a pilot, that we can put together educational materials. And I think you're exactly right that could be a great spot. But it's obviously a lot of people that you're kind of relying on to do this, and also the consumer being willing to listen. But I think that's certainly point of purchase is would be a powerful place to really make a difference.
Yeah, and this is something that the Clearing the Confusion coalition that I mentioned earlier has also looked and talked about. And I think one place we could certainly start is to figure out a way to for people to translate sort of these branded terms into standardized functions, right? With this consistent description. Yeah, obviously because of the franchise dealer network and some of the inconsistencies that just kind of come with the territory of independent dealerships, there can be some challenges. It's definitely would be very difficult to really get sort of 100% consistency across all dealerships. But I think it's as Tara said, absolutely a goal worth working towards, and something that we're continuing to think and talk about.
And thank you to an audience member who pointed out that Tesla actually provides tutorial videos on the screen in the car for education on how to use autopilot. So I think there are a multitude of ways that people can get education about their features. For example, My Car Does What is a website that provides lots of different videos and information on ADAS features that we personally use and promote. So wanted to throw that one out there as well. Okay, and we received another audience question asking about how SAE can make sure that the OEMs use the standard names for each of their ADAS features. I think, Ed, this gets back to your point about clearing the confusion as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I think, ultimately, it's probably up to regulators to figure out sort of how to structure their rules in a way that don't allow for the kinds of loopholes that I think we're seeing right now. And obviously, Pave is a nonprofit that does not engage in advocacy. It's not our place to say how that should happen, or even that it should necessarily happen. But I think just conceptually, obviously SAE doesn't have its own police out there enforcing its rules. And so I think, to the extent that the regulatory system has embraced the level system and sort of makes assumptions based on it, I think it is probably pretty important to make sure that, you know, there is some consistency in terms of automakers sort of really living up to that design intent, you know, question and saying, you know, this is really, you know, our vision for the system that we're developing, and so we're going to call it, which by the way the SAE standards, you know, say you should do. You should describe, regardless of the state of development, you should describe the system as what your design intent for the final product is. So how to enforce that is tricky right now at the federal level. There also just aren't really regulations having to do with, you know, key issues around autonomous vehicles like the software or things like that. But I think that, you know, we are seeing a lot more data reporting around requirements from NHTSA around crashes, and maybe this is sort of an early step in them sort of moving more to address that. But you know, I think our role here is to help kind of explain that landscape rather than say sort of how, you know, those kinds of regulations should be put in place.
Absolutely. And another member of the audience actually just made a good point that, you know, a lot of education that surrounds whether it's Tesla's autopilot or other ADAS features can often come from social media, YouTube videos, informal channels of communication, not just those point of contact with the dealer. So sort of on that point, actually, we had another question that involves, you know, why is ADAS use such an important safety priority? It, you know, doesn't get quite as much attention as far as causes of crashes and other things. And so, Tara, why is ADAS use important to Pave's mission of education for the public?
Well, I mean, you know, again, ADAS features offer great safety potential. When used properly, it, you know, really can, technologies that are available today can really save a lot of lives and can make our roads a lot safer. The key is using them. You know, I always laugh when I go to visit my parents and they have these cars with great safety features on them, and they're like, oh yeah, well, it was beeping and it annoyed me, so I turned it off. So I think it's actually using them properly, and that gets to the question earlier about, you know, training people when they buy a vehicle, so they understand what they're capable of. And then, you know, to Ed's point about you know, the autopilot and things, that it's the marketing can be dangerous, that people need to understand that these features do have great safety potential, but they are also limited in what they can do. You know, just because something is called full self-driving doesn't mean that this car is intended to drive itself without a human at the wheel. It's just not. And so I think there's a you know, responsibility in marketing that is critical also. And so if the manufacturers aren't doing that for themselves, then it's you know, up to educating the public on what cars are capable of.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that a little bit. So I think, Terry, you're absolutely right. The you know, as you mentioned in you know, the poll results, we see this, you know, a lot of resistance to the just autonomous vehicles and the idea of getting inside one. And as you pointed out in you know, the earlier portion of this this conversation, you know, the number one thing that kind of, you know, helps people overcome that is just experience, right? Real world experience with the technology. And in some ways, ADAS is a little bit of like a pacifier, something like a training wheels sort of to get towards that, like in terms of reducing those concerns, because it's, you know, using ADAS responsibly, as Sarah was saying, it shows people that technology really can improve, you know, safety, which is really what AVs are all about. The flip side, of course, of that is that, you know, if there is confusion, if there is sort of this this autonomous washing, that it can be the opposite, that actually ADAS can actually worsen if the design is not done right, and if there's that autonomous washing piece that's encouraging people to misuse the system, it can actually make people less safe. And I think, and again, it you know, not only does that, you know, sort of you know, make people more fearful of automation technology in general, right? But then again, as I mentioned, you know, that confusion can also lead to you know, the media reporting crashes that are not in fact autonomous vehicle crashes as autonomous vehicle crashes, and you know, therefore jeopardizing that all important public acceptance that this technology requires in a way that no other technology that we've really had, certainly in my lifetime, has really, you know, that really requires. So so I think it's like a stick and a carrot kind of a thing. Both ADAS both provides a glide path to autonomy acceptance of this technology, but it also potentially provides an opportunity to really, worsen sort of some of the mistrust that's out there.
Interesting. Well, as we're nearing close to time, I always like to, have at least some kind of a call to action. So I'd love to hear, your both of your ideas on what can individuals, possibly in this audience today, do to help contribute to these educational challenges you guys have pointed out. Tara, you want to get us started?
That is a really good question. I think partly, it's taught. I mean, I assume a lot of you work in the auto industry, and I think people who are knowledgeable about these kinds of things, just kind of talking to people, again, it's astounding to all of us every time, we describe what we do for a living, and people, just, I would say on both extremes, like people having, thinking that they have cruise control on their car, and that means they have a self-driving car, to people thinking a self-driving car is something that can fly to Mars. So it's partly just, word of mouth and talking to people and educating people on a very micro level. Pave and other places have great ways to get involved. We are actually really trying to we are trying to expand our educational efforts with K-12. I think that working with kids, actually, and SAE obviously has some such phenomenal kind of STEM education, youth education efforts too. So I think kind of engaging with young people is a really great way to educate future drivers. We also, another thing that we are working on is similar to the K through 12, but working in terms of driver education, that I think when people are just getting into we talked about how dealerships are one way to ensure you're reaching, drivers of these vehicles, but I think incorporating part of this in driver education is also a way to reach a really broad audience. Yeah, those are some things. I'd probably have some other ideas too.
Yeah, definitely. So and at the risk of being self-promotional here, Pave does put on a weekly virtual panel discussion every Wednesday. I think that is a really good way if you do want to kind of either sort of build on or broaden your knowledge. We really try and address a really diverse range of topics around automation, everything from, how do you ensure safe public road testing of this experimental technology, to some of the issues around autonomous washing. We had Liza Dixon, the founder, on last fall. And so, we really work hard to make those informative and engaging. And so if you wanted to join us every Wednesday, we'd love that. And then I think, we all have the power to influence, our peer groups, right? Again, people just, hearing things from people and trust has a power that, even a nonprofit organization really will never fully be able to have. And so I would say, you as sort of more experienced, knowledgeable folks, we would love to just see you, everything from just sort of maybe thinking twice before you share something and just asking yourself, am I spreading, something that may be not true, or maybe just sort of unfounded hype, or is this something that really actually helps people understand this technology? I think remembering that life and death can hang in the balance in a very literal way is a really good way to kind of check some of those things. And of course, that's a good skill to have as social media in general, of thinking twice before you tweet things, as I've certainly learned at least a few times. And so, if you want to go beyond that and really start to make content for sort of a wider audience and develop more of an audience for yourself to help sort of people understand this technology, I think it's a great opportunity. There really aren't a lot of sort of influencers in the autonomous vehicle space. We certainly need more. And I am certainly happy to help anyone who's interested in that, however we can. And, so definitely reach out to us. You can find, me on Twitter, and you can find us at pavecampaign.org, Twitter and other social media platforms at pavecampaign. And we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to, support your efforts to help sort of get, real facts out and kind of fight back against a lot of the misinformation that we're seeing out there.
Great. Well, that wraps up our discussion today. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Ed and Tara, for both joining us, and everybody in the audience for joining us today as well. If you'd like to follow up more or have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the SAE Detroit section at events@saedetroit.org, or to Pave at emails@pavecampaign.org, as shown on the screen. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.